Hey, Mark. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Mark Bello. I'm an attorney. I'm also an author. I retired from practicing law primarily in the personal injury, uh, social justice arena. And early in my career, I'm 71, when I was in my 30s, I handled a case against the Catholic Church. A priest molested two boys, and the case turned out to be the case of my life. And I promised myself way back then that I'd one day write a book about the experience. And I'll explain what I mean by, quote, the experience, unquote. But that's what inspired me to write a book. What I didn't think would happen was that it would take 35 years to write it. A family got in the way, um, life got in the way, work got in the way. And it wasn't until I actually decided to slow down my practice and retire that I actually sat down and wrote in earnest. Little pieces here and there. It started out as, for instance, as a nonfiction book, and ended up being a fiction book, which I'll explain if you want. But that case inspired me to become an author. Post that book, events in the news started to happen that, for lack of a better way to say it, pissed me off. And I started thinking about writing novels. What the phrase that people use is ripped from the headlines, and that essentially created my author career. I thought I would be a one and done author. Instead, I became I think it's now 13, 14 books. So I've actually become an author, which is kind of the surprise of my life.
Love that. I would love if you could tell us more about what your books are about.
Well, as I indicated, the first one was about the clergy abuse scandal in the church. What I did in that book was I stayed away from the word Catholic, even though it's pretty transparent what religion I'm talking about. The reason I did that was because I believe that even though the clergy abuse scandal in the Catholic Church is the primary scandal in that uh, atrocity, there are others. Boy Scouts had a similar scandal. The Missouri Synod had a similar scandal. There are abuse cases, child abuse cases, all over the country, all over the world. Not as public or as scandalous as the one in the Catholic Church. A rabbi, for instance, in my religion, got accused of child abuse. So it's not endemic to the Catholic Church, and that's why I left out the word Catholic. But it's clearly about the clergy abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. Post at that book, as I indicated, we had the 2016 election, and I wrote a book about a fictional president who happens to be a bigot. As I told you off the air, I got accused of doing a hit job on the man who became president. And my response to that has always been the book came out before he became president. So if you see a similarity between the two, maybe that's on him, not on me. I wrote a book about white supremacy. I wrote a book about Black Lives Matter and innocent Black men being shot by white police officers. I wrote a book about school shootings, about a Supreme Court justice or a candidate who has a sexual assault in his past. I wrote a book about the immigration crisis. So as you can see, many of my books are ripped from the headlines, as they say. I've also written a few whodunits. One of them is a Zachary Blake book. My legal thriller Hero protagonist. The other is a new series that was just released called The Final Steps, and it's about a middle-aged judge who retires, writes a book, and goes on a lecture tour, and her best friend is accused of murder. So she drops everything and decides to solve the murder, whether it's him that did it or whether it's someone else. And that book was released last April. So I'm having fun with it. I wouldn't say I would call it a more of an expensive hobby than a career, but I'm having fun in my retirement years.
Love that. And I know you touched on it, but what inspired you to write your books? Is there something that spoke to you about what headlines you pulled, like how you went about that?
Well, it is that. I mean, as I said earlier. I don't know whether this was off air or on air, but if something pisses me off, I tend to write about it. I mean, I I spend most of my life being an angry old man. If you remember the movie with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon called Grumpy Old Men, uh, my kids accuse me of becoming those guys. I don't know that I'm grumpy in the sense that I'm angry in terms of and this isn't a political statement. It's not. I believe in this side over that side. Although I have my own political beliefs, I believe that we ought to be able to talk to each other, whether we have differences politically or not, and we don't seem to be able to do that. If you're on this side, I like you. If you're on that side, I hate you. That's got to stop in America. It seems to me. So that you asked me what inspires me. Obviously, I told you what inspired the first book. The presidential election inspired the second. And the rash of school shootings inspired the fifth. Is it the fourth? Fifth. Uh, as a Jewish person, I'm not a big fan of white supremacy. So, because it's usually white Christian supremacy, and they believe that anybody who's not them um, is either going to hell or a bad person. So I felt compelled to write about that. Uh, Cops shooting innocent black people, a couple of specific incidents before George Floyd caused me to write that book. The Kavanaugh hearings inspired Supreme Betrayal, which is a book about the uh, Supreme Court justice who has a sexual assault in his past. There again, I got accused of picking on Kavanaugh, and yes, the Kavanaugh hearings inspired the book, but I wasn't writing about Kavanaugh. My guy, his name is Oliver. I can't think of my own character's last name. Uh, Wilkinson. Oliver Wilkinson is probably the most miserable SOB character I've written. Uh, I can't say that about Kavanaugh. He seems like a nice guy. I don't agree with him politically, but he seems like a nice guy. I'm sure he's well intentioned. This guy is pure evil. So it's not like I'm picking on a specific politician or political theory. I just think that the idea that a candidate can be appointed by a president hiding a rather nasty past um, is compelling reading. The book is about the victim in the case who couldn't sit by and do nothing while a sexual predator gets appointed to the Supreme Court. So the book is primarily about a woman, uh, her valiant effort to prevent his nomination. Whether she succeeds or not, I'll leave that to your listeners to find out by reading the book. But again, my books are about things that I've seen happen in the news. The last two books are straight whodunits. I read a couple of cozy mysteries, and I thought, okay, this is a fun little genre. I think I'll try it. And I wrote a book called You Have the Right to Remain Silent, my eighth Zachary Blake novel that reads like a cozy. It's unlike the other Zachary Blake novels. And then I enjoyed writing it so much, and it won 3 awards, 3 rather prominent awards. So I said, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. And I created this whole new series with the former judge, Rosalind Maxwell, and she is the protagonist of my um, latest book, which is called The Final Steps. The one interesting point that I'd make, if I'm not talking too much, is I have a couple of books that have female protagonists, and there's a school of thought out there that a white guy can't write a book that features a black protagonist, or a man can't write a book that features a woman protagonist, or a woman can't write a book that features a male protagonist. And I push back on that. I mean, maybe I don't get uh, everything that makes a woman tick, but I can certainly write a book about how a woman feels about justice or injustice, whether it, no matter what color or sex that person is. So I've tried to put it in a woman's from a woman's point of view. I don't dwell on womanhood per se, but I think it reads quite well for a man picking a female protagonist.
Love that. When you were writing your books, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your books are for?
They're for me, uh, selfishly. I mean, it's an attempt to portray uh, a point of view that I think is important in America. We discussed this off air. I think regardless of what our political beliefs are, our religious beliefs are, our socioeconomic situation is, uh, race, creed, or color, we're all Americans, and I think we all ought to get along better than we're getting along. And the country is becoming very divided, and that's very troubling to me. I've lived in it for 71 years, longer than most. I've seen it in times where we've had substantial turmoil in America. Before you were born, we had the 60s, and the 60s were a very troubling time. The civil rights movement took place then. Uh, if a black person moved into a white neighborhood, all hell broke loose. That doesn't happen anymore. That's a good thing. In a lot of ways, we're a better country than we were back then. But in a lot of ways, nothing's changed. And I try to write about those issues, those trigger point issues that kind of plague America as we're talking today.
I know you've touched on this next question, but how long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
Well, the start of my writing career was the priest abuse case. By the way, we haven't discussed this, but I want to make clear that because I mentioned it, but I didn't elaborate. The book started out as a nonfiction book. I wanted to write about what an attorney goes through when he handles a case like that, and the kind of David versus Goliath experience that a young sole practitioner goes through when he takes on a Goliath defendant like the church. I mean, think about the power and money that is available to the defendant in that case as compared to this young 34-year-old lawyer who takes them on. I had truth and justice on my side. We were in the right, they were in the wrong, but there are powerful interests that are aligned, both politically and religiously, to beat you up. And it felt like some kind of conspiratorial event. So what I did being an English literature major before I went to law school, I said, boy, this feels like the CIA or MI6 pulling strings behind the scenes. Here you have these religious people that you're deposing under oath, and they're lying to you. Who's telling them to lie? Who's making the decisions to do this or that? Who's hiding witnesses? Who's destroying documents? What's going on here? And it felt like there was a conspiratorial agency behind the scenes, at least creatively, it felt that way. So I created an organization called the Coalition in the book. And the Coalition job is to defend the church, not any particular denomination, but the church in scandalous situations. And this coalition will do anything possible to prevent scandal. And I mean anything possible. So I want everybody to know, if they decide to read the book, it's a highly embellished account of what happened to me, but there is some truth to the way it felt. It really felt. I'm, for instance, deposing under oath the Archbishop of Detroit. When you cross-examine someone, you're supposed to ask questions you already know the answer to. I don't know if any lawyers ever told you that, but you're supposed to ask questions that you know the answers to. You don't want anybody pontificating about a subject that you're not familiar with. It can come back to haunt you. So I would ask a question that I absolutely knew was yes or no, and he would answer in the opposite. If the answer was yes, he'd say no. In other words, he lied to me. You're sitting there in front of the Archbishop of Detroit, wearing the robe and the regalia of royalty, essentially. You've seen him on television. You respect the hell out of him, and he sits there at a deposition and lies to you. That's shocking to me, and I wanted to get to. I wanted to suggest that somebody behind the scenes might be pulling the strings, and that's what the book does. It creates this whole CIA type feel to the experience of pursuing litigation as this small little two-person law firm against this major worldwide religious organization. And the book reads very much like a David versus Goliath experience.
Love that.
The second question I think you asked, or the second part of the question, was inspiration for others, and that's again the whatever headline grabbed me at the moment, whether it be the presidential election in a book called, by the way, the first book is called Betrayal of Faith. The second book is called Betrayal of Justice, and that's the book about the presidential election. The third book is a book about cops turning on other cops called Betrayal in Blue. The fourth book is a book about a innocent traffic cop, an innocent black man being shot by a traffic cop during a traffic stop. The fifth book is called Betrayal High, is about a high school shooting. The sixth book is Supreme Betrayal, about the sexual assault and the Supreme Court justice candidate. The seventh book is called Betrayal at the Border, which is obviously about the immigration crisis from two points of view: one, the southern border, and two, a American citizen who is of a Syrian descent, who goes back to Syria and gets kidnapped. ISIS is involved, and Zachary Blake, the hero of all my Zachary Blake novels, goes to Syria to negotiate a release. Um, the eighth book is called "You Have the Right to Remain Silent," and that is the whodunit. The person who's accused of the murder of her husband. I can't stop being political. She's a it's kind of a um, James Carville, Mary Madeline story. A Republican congressman is murdered. I'm sorry, a Democratic congressman is murdered. His Republican talk show host wife is accused of the murder. She discovers the body, goes into a catatonic state, which is why she's silent. That's where the title comes from. The question is whether she did it, and her catatonic state comes from guilt, or whether the shock of discovering his body did it. Um, and there are obviously in a whodunit multiple other suspects. And then the eighth book, or ninth book rather, is not a Zachary Blake novel. It's a cozy mystery uh, set in Harbor Springs, Michigan, which is a very cool northern Michigan town. Uh, I don't know if you've ever been to northern Michigan, but it's beautiful. Uh, so I wanted to write a book with that setting, and that's about a former judge who represents her best friend, or tries to exonerate her best friend who's accused of murder. So it's there's a wide variety of books, uh, mostly inspired by the news. Some I just sat down and said, like those last two, I want to write something different. I want to see how creative I can be without using the news as my inspiration. And I think I wrote two pretty good books. The first one, "You Have the Right to Remain Silent," has won multiple book awards, so that's kind of exciting. And then I wrote two children's books. Uh, if you want to talk about those, I can talk to you about the inspiration for those.
Sure, that'd be great.
What a lead in, right? um, I wrote a book called Happy Jack, Sad Jack, a bullying story. When I was a kid, as I indicated earlier, I'm a Jewish person, and I moved into an all Christian neighborhood. And someone asked me, where do I go to church? And I said, I don't go to church, I go to synagogue. And the person punched me in the mouth, just for that. I mean, I didn't say anything like, I don't like Christians or anything like that, because I don't feel that way. But he apparently doesn't like Jewish people. So I found out just then, that was like sixth grade. I found out that there are people out there, surprise, surprise, who don't like Jewish people. The the book I wrote, though, even though it was based on personal experience, was written about a biracial child who goes to kindergarten and finds out for the first time that he's not like the other kids. And Happy Jack becomes Sad Jack. They don't like him because he's a person of color. The um, the inspiration, as I indicated, was my own personal experience. The issue of bullying, I think, though, is important in America for the same reasons I told you about the adult books I write. I think that Americans ought to get along better than they get along, regardless of what color or religion we are. And I think, which is why I wrote the book, I think we ought to teach that lesson much earlier in life than we do. So I wrote a book about a biracial child, going to kindergarten for the first time and encountering bullying. It's not a harsh book. it's a story in rhyme. It's a fun little book, and it's a good lesson for anybody from, let's say, late preschool to third, fourth grade. Uh, that was my social justice children's book. Then I wrote a safety children's book, premised essentially on the same issue that we're too late. And that book is about distracted driving and doing two things at once being a dangerous thing to do. It takes examples. You can't uh, button your shirt. Two things at once are a hard thing to do. You can't button your shirt and tie your shoe. So for a child, they can readily identify with the regular things they do in life and translate that into you can't drive a car and talk on your phone at the same time either, or text and drive. And that's the message of the new book, which has not come out yet. It's going to come out, I think, either in August or September. That book is called What Should I Do? One Thing or Two. It almost sounds Dr. Seussy, doesn't it? What should I do? One thing or two. Asher's distracted lesson. And Asher learns an important lesson by getting involved in a little fender bender because he and his family, on the way to the park, are struck by a distracted driver. Nothing, no serious auto accident, but a little tale about their attempted visit to the park getting short circuited by getting fender bended by a distracted driver. So that's the safety aspects of my children's books.
What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
My getting into it, you mean? My
Just
process?
your
My,
process.
well, have you heard the phrase plotter or pantser? Or
Yes.
I'm a pantser. I I don't look to write a book. Something inspires me to do it, typically, other than the two examples I gave you. Well, even that though, I read a rather good cozy mystery and got inspired by reading someone else's work for those books. But the the process is an idea comes to me. I don't outline it per se. I write a rather detailed synopsis. Here's here's where it starts. Here's where it ends. Now go ahead and write the middle. so so typically, I don't plot out a book or um, give a lot of thought to outlining a book, but it tends to flow once I write. Somebody once asked me in a podcast, "Do I what do I do when I'm suffering from writer's block?" And my response typically is I don't suffer from writer's block. Once I start on a book, once I have uh, the thought about how to proceed, I find it relatively. I don't want to say the word easy because if it was easy, the whole world would write books. Uh, I know it's not easy, but it's for me, it's not. I don't run into these periods where you have to put it down for months at a time. Other than the first one, for other reasons, uh, I don't run into these periods where I have to put it down. I can't think of where to go. The process includes research. If you're writing about an incident in the news, what I like to do is present all sides. So I do a lot of internet research about a particular subject. Some of which is uh, pulled, for lack of a better way to say it, directly from the headlines. For instance, if you read the novel Betrayal in Black, you'll see correlations between the incident that occurred and the Orlando Castillo police shooting that happened in Minnesota. So I'm not shameless about taking topics from the news and using those fact situations. They're obviously fiction. They're fictionalized, and they're embellished, like the book about the clergy abuse crisis. They do also, which I think is important, contain important legal stuff. What would happen in court in this situation? How a judge would rule on this objection? What's a court proceeding like? What is the likelihood that this would happen in a real courtroom? What's the best way to handle this particular situation if you're the lawyer representing this side or that side? So I do tend to use my legal knowledge to give people a sense for how a real courtroom might handle a particular incident or event.
Love that. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Privacy. If there's a lot going on around me, I have 4 children, adult children. If you can imagine, since they're adults, married adults, I also have 10 grandchildren, and we have a backyard swimming pool. So I'm sitting in my office writing, and the door opens, and it's, "Hi, Poppy, come swimming with us." Well, you're right. Your writing for the day is over. So I need to be able to sit in my office and write or read. A lot of my writing comes from my reading. So I need that quality. That's the one thing that I would say I require, which is I can't go outside with a computer with a bunch of stuff running around and or happening around me and write. I need quiet and privacy.
Love that. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
My favorite writing
Snack or drink?
snack, hmm, caramel corn. Drink would I drink a lot of water. I don't crave sugary drinks or diet drinks. It doesn't have to taste like anything. But I do need my thirst quenched.
Love that.
Coffee
What
in the morning. Can't wake up without coffee. I'm definitely addicted to caffeine. I get headaches if I don't if I don't if I don't have my morning coffee.
Love that. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I write what I enjoy. I enjoy reading legal thrillers. I enjoy people like Richard North Patterson and John Grissom and oh, I don't know, Scott Pratt, uh, Robert Bailey, uh, Bria Atwood. I like legal thrillers a lot. Uh, I also like mystery novels and other types of thrillers, spy thrillers. Like I've read every Daniel Silva book. I even like here and there. So some of it's too complicated for me, but I like science fiction. And I'm also a closet Dean Koontz, Stephen King guy. I can't write it because I don't have a warped mind like those two guys. But I must confess Uh, it's a guilty pleasure to hear werewolves eating humans and stuff like that. Don't ask me why. I don't like watching it. By the way, I don't like horror movies. I don't need to see graphic violence, but I enjoy reading it. If that makes any sense to you.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
The ones I mentioned inspire me. I don't know that they inspired me to become a writer. What inspired me to become a writer again is that case. Uh, Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't know if you could see behind me, but there's a painting on the wall. If you see the guy in the white suit, that's Atticus Finch. He's leaving court. He's leaving the courtroom after he's lost Tom Robinson's case, and the black gentleman in the gallery, in the balcony rather, because they don't let black citizens sit in the gallery, is up there with Scout, and he tells Scout, Atticus' daughter, "Stand up, your father's passing," and that's that scene. Um, the adherence to the law, the respect for the law, and the taking of Tom Robinson's case when it made him the most unpopular man in town was very, very inspiring to me. That book was an inspiration to me. And I know I promised that I wouldn't be political, but the idea that uh, certain politicians are encouraging a ban on a book like that just shocks me. That might be the most inspirational book I've ever read. So I'm very troubled by the whole book banning um, school of thought and the attack on what they call wokeness. If you look up the word woke, you'll find that it's not a bad thing. They just created the political atmosphere that makes it a bad thing. Um, and by the way, again, not to be too political, and maybe you'll delete this. I don't know. That contract we discussed gives you the right, but the idea that um, someone decides for us, you and I, whether we believe this way or that way, what we can read. Uh, I don't think the First Amendment permits that, and the First Amendment isn't political. The First Amendment is a document or an amendment to a document that gives us the right to read whatever we want. And you can't tell me what to read, and I can't tell you what to read. Maybe I don't want to hear your point of view. Maybe you don't want to hear mine, but you have a right not to read it or listen to it. But nobody can tell you what to do. And they seem to be out there trying to tell us what we can and cannot do. And I'm just not a fan.
What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
When you say grow up, are you talking about as a child?
Yes, younger years.
Well, as a child, my favorite books were Dr. Seuss books. Maybe that's why I write stories in rhyme. I don't know. I, I I didn't set out to write stories in rhyme. I set out to write children's books with messages. If it isn't obvious by now, I like to write message books. Um, so maybe the fact that I like that genre inspired me to write stories in rhyme. But I just thought he was so clever. Uh, in terms of children's books, uh, as a older child, I used to read the Hardy Boys. I used to read Nancy Drew. I'm an old man, so those books were the books of my youth. They're not the books of your youth or people younger than you. But in my day, Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, those kinds of books as you're growing up were um, the books of my youth, and I did read all of those. I also read comic books. I loved Superman and Batman and the DC comic books. I had a huge collection of those, uh, and I'm one of those idiots that had a huge collection of comic books and a huge collection of baseball cards, and the comic books went into the garbage, and the baseball cards went into my bicycle spokes, and I probably had something like I don't know, a Michael Jordan rookie card or something, and or the equivalent of it, Mickey Mantle, a Mickey Mantle rookie card, and probably put it in my in my bicycle spokes. So uh, I probably, it's like taking uh, $100 bills and putting them in your bicycle spokes. We wouldn't do that, but we did that with baseball cards. Who knew?
Love that. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
Daniel Silva is one of those. Grissom is one of those. Richard North Patterson is one of those. Uh, they're not series novels. It's not like, oh, I've got. Although Silva has Gabriel Alon, uh, uh, and I like his series. There's 19, 20 books of those. I recommend Daniel Silva to anybody, Jewish or not. Gabriel Alon is an Israeli, which is why he kind of speaks to me a little bit. But it doesn't matter. Pick a denomination, and you'll like Gabriel Alon if you invent the fact that he's worked for that denomination rather than this denomination. Um, Grissom isn't a serial writer. He writes unique. He's only had two books, as I recall. Um, he has Jake Brigance, I think the guy is how you pronounce his character's name. His first book was a Time to Kill, featured that character, and then recently, his 40th or 50th or whatever whatever book he's on, what a career he's had. Um, I bow to his royalty. Uh, the he finally did a second Jake Brigant novel. Don't ask me the title. Um, so he doesn't write uh, a series, but I've enjoyed most of his books. Sometimes I feel he's missed the mark here and there, but for the most part, I enjoyed his books, especially the first. I loved Time to Kill. To me, that's one of the finest legal books out there. Um, Other authors, series authors, will inspire me. I know there's more. I just can't think of them.
Totally fine.
I'll send you an email.
So,
we can supplement writing.
yes. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Starting out reading, what should they read as a child?
Um, More maybe they're in their early 20s, late teens, they've been in a slump, and how would you recommend they go about getting back into reading again?
I would suggest that they read the Zachary Blake legal thriller series or any other Mark M. Bello novel. Um, I don't know. I believe reading and writing. I I thought the question that you were going to ask me was inspiring other writers, but I love the Nike slogan as it applies to reading and writing. My suggestion is just do it. And then the other um, inspiration, for lack of a better way to say it, that I would use is a song from Sesame Street. Don't worry if it's not good enough for anyone else to hear, just sing. Well, change sing to write or read or anything else you do. Stop worrying about what other people perceive, what other people do, what other people like. Do it for yourself. So I would say just do it, A, and B, don't worry about what anybody else feels or says. Again, just do it. Barbara Streisand, what goes through my mind is the Barbara Streisand version of that song. Don't worry if it's not good enough for anyone else to hear, just sing. Um, don't worry if it's not good enough for anyone else to read, just read. Don't worry if it's not good enough for anyone else to like or write, just write. So if I'm advising a budding reader or a budding writer, if you find something that you enjoy reading, unless it's hate speech, unless it's some manifesto that tells you to blow people up or hate on this group or that group, because I'm not a fan of hate speech if it's not obvious by now. Uh, unless it hurts others, just read, just write, just sing, enjoy
Love
life.
love that. That kind of leads into our next question of what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
Just what I said. Stop worrying about whether it's good or not. Again, there's a money issue involved in writing, and writers should probably have a collaborative team. I personally can't afford one, but writers should have readers. At the very least, you should have an arc reader, someone who pre-reads your book and points out flaws in the plot, flaws in the character, inconsistencies, uh, punctuation problems, whatever. It's best to have an editor. Those are expensive. There's no shortage out there, ladies and gentlemen, of people who are willing to read your work for free. Free is always good. People like free. So you can find advanced readers, what they call ARC readers. You send them an advanced reader copy, which is where the word ARC came from, in case you didn't know. And they'll send you back a short little email saying, I enjoyed your book. Here's where I think you went wrong. And you can agree or disagree. But I find that free readers make my work better. Editors make my work better if I can afford an editor here and there. Proofreaders, uh, which is not really editing per se, but it's, let's call it a less expensive form of editing. Um, we could, you and I could have a whole 45-minute conversation about editing. I'm not going to get into that, but you should have your work looked at for a lot of reasons, a lot of different uh, aspects of writing a novel by others before you publish it. But in terms of writing it, I would suggest that give it a try. Um, you're not a failure if you can't do it, because you and millions of others have tried to write a book and not been able to do it. But to not try would be, to me, the ultimate failure if that's what you want to do. If you feel like you have a novel in you, if you feel like you have a children's book in you, if you feel like you have a novella in you. I wrote a 39-page novella that we haven't even talked about. Um, that uh, obviously, it's easier to write a 39-page book than it is to write a 300-page book. So maybe you start there. I didn't start with a novella, but it's an easier genre to write in. Write a short story. A lot of books, by the way, a lot of movies, full-length movies, come from short stories. So it's uh, again, the advice to sum it up is just right.
Love
Not
that.
Right, but WRITE. Just right.
Love it. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
That you'd be surprised to find out about. I don't know. That I'm still active in sports. I play tennis. I play pickleball. I swim. Uh, I I do a lot of uh, sports playing with my grandchildren, so they're not surprised. I'm kind of an active guy for 71. Uh, I can't think of anything else that what I would say is surprising. I'm pretty boring. I'm trying to think of something unique and exciting. I mean, it's unique and exciting that I wrote a book that's won some awards, and it's even more unique and exciting that I turned around and wrote 12 more. If you asked me, if you asked 40-year-old Mark Bello, would he ever write that first novel? I would have said no. Mark would have said no. If you would have asked Mark at any age, even the one that wrote Betrayal of Faith, would you write 12, 14 more? Because I have two more in the works. I have a legal romance I'm writing. That's kind of fun. And I have another Zachary Blake novel that I'm writing. But if you'd have asked me in 2016, do you plan on writing, you know, double-digit novels? Do you plan on writing a post-retirement career? I would have told you no. And if you said yes, yes, you are. I believe in you. I would have told you were crazy. So uh, I think that's unique and exciting. I'm surprised. I'm surprised myself. How's that?
Love that. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
That it's been a pleasure to be on your show, and you're a great host.
Thank you.
You can you. I guess I should tell people where they can find my books, right?
Yep. Oh, so where's the best place for readers to find your book? I know some really love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place to connect with you?
If people want signed copies, uh, that's hard for me because I sell most of my books on Amazon, and they're print on demand. But if somebody wants a an autographed copy, they can email me at um, info at markmbello.com, and I'll try to get them some kind of autograph copy. They might have to pay a little more because of shipping, but uh, it would be my pleasure to try to do that. In terms of where to find my books, my website has links to the Amazon uh, links, uh, purchase links. They're also available at Barnes and Noble, at Kobo, at Apple Books, and everywhere else online that people find books. If you went to your bookstore and tried to order a Mark M. Bello book or tried to get one off the shelves, you wouldn't be able to find one. But you can order the book uh, from a bookstore. They'll look it up online and order it and get it for you if you want the print version at the bookstore. If you live in Michigan and do that, and the bookstore notifies me that you've done that, I'll sign it for you. I'll come down to the bookstore for you and sign it in the Detroit area, um, where I live. In the wintertime, I live in Delray Beach, Florida, so you can do it in Delray Beach in the wintertime. um, if you don't know where Delray Beach is, think anywhere from Miami to West Palm Beach. Delray Beach is between the two. Um, but I sell most of my books on Amazon. Uh, Barnes and Noble probably second. Kobo, anywhere that any online bookseller carries my books. You can Google my name, Mark M. Bello, and you'll typically find my books. There's a guy who runs a pizza school in New York City who has the same name as me. So you either get Mark Bello, the pizza guy, who isn't Mark M. Bello, or you'll get Mark Bello, the author. There's a few other Mark Bellos out there, but those are the two I run into the most. The pizza guy drives me crazy because he keeps coming up before me.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop those links and information in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.